So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Patricia. And,
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stefan. Hello, my name is Patricia, and I'm going to be doing this presentation with Claire, Selena, and David. We all work at the Geospatial Center, and the reason why we have such a extensive presentation is because of Eric Steiner. He told me I should give you a lot of background about visualizing evidence. Yeah? I think so. Yeah. Yeah. And so, well, let's get started. So if I asked you, where are we, what would you say? Stanford. West Coast. California. United States. So how comfortable do you feel about your location where you are now, let's say 2-3 years ago? Like 30% more confident about your awareness of where you are? 40%, 50%? How about we go back 10 years ago? Could you find, like I tell you, you need to drive to this new city or find this new restaurant? How comfortable do you feel now to 10 years ago? Have you noticed any difference in how you are aware of your surroundings, how well you can find a new place? So that's kind of the idea of this lecture. We're going to be talking about the evolution of visualizing geographic data. And just to put it in context of this class, we are going to be right around the middle between confirmation and synthesis. So we've been doing a lot of exploration with Tableau and other software. And right now we start moving into this area where we start confirming our theories, our hypotheses. And then we start thinking about synthesizing that and just putting it together in a way that is effective communication. But you will find out that when you are in this area, you are looping around back and forward. So when you start thinking about synthesizing, then you need to go back to confirmation again, and even sometimes going back to exploration. So we are going to be focusing more on the tools that we can do for confirmation and then synthesize that visual communication. And hopefully I get you scared enough, or maybe another way of saying it will be confused enough that you go ahead and start exploring on your own. So we're going to get started with this Geospatial Revolution trailer, which I think it really summarizes really well where are we looking back at where we come from. So go ahead.
Say you're in California, where I live, and you want to know how susceptible your house is to a wildfire. So we put sensors, like our eyes, on satellites, we collect information, and then computers create maps. Okay, now you have a map, so if you want to analyze that map, well, you take the information about this slope. Are you on a dead-end street? Do you have a lot of fuel around your house? You put all of that information into a computer, and it can tell you how at risk you are for losing your home to a wildfire.
Ever since the Babylonians etched the lay of the land on clay tablets in 2300 BC, mankind has needed accurate representations of the earth.
Maps used to be made from horseback in the 1800s. They took a long time to make. So we evolved to aerial photography, and that's made a huge difference with how humans understand the earth.
And showing the terrain startling vivid.
In the 60s, people began to think about the notion of encapsulating or abstracting geography in a computer. And people could look at the database in visualizations or analytics, and that was just a magical idea.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear that I will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
The Obama campaign took to a new level their use of technology with respect to mapping.
They knew what voters to target. They knew, where the marginal voter was, and frankly, the ones that use it the most effectively get elected.
After 9/11, U.S. troops went into Afghanistan and they went in with Russian maps. Because who'd ever think you'd have to have maps of Afghanistan?
Geospatial intelligence has become really the foundation for just about anything that happens in the military. It has to do with understanding in a very time-sensitive fashion things that may be developing in different parts of the world.
It's an ability to enable decision makers, whether they're someone sitting in the White House or someone sitting in a foxhole.
More than half the world's population now lives in urban areas. 13 of the 20 largest cities are on coastlines. So how do you model in the potential rise of sea level because of climate change?
We simply could not know how the Earth works without geospatial technologies telling us where things are, how they're related, how it's put together to tell us the story of what really is happening.
We have a clear mandate to protect innocent life.
The conflict in Darfur is over 5 years old now. Somewhere around 400,000 people have died. We wanted to go to the place, collect testimony, take photographs. The Sudanese government had very little interest in having us on the ground. So we purchased satellite imagery, and we saw whole villages destroyed. We took those images to the Sudanese government to let them know that people around the world were watching these villages remotely.
For the insiders, the transition to digital geography has been truly revolutionary. We can navigate our world with much greater confidence than we could have before. It's changed the science agenda, it's changed the technology, it's created new occupations, but for those outside, you may not even be aware that there is a field called geospatial. It has made geography ordinary, which is the most revolutionary thing of all.
All right, so very dramatic video, a little bit out of date. It was before this past elections, but it gives you an idea of how geospatial information and geospatial technologies is being used in many, many different disciplines all around the world. So what I'm going to be doing now is telling you, this is a history class, a little bit. We're going to go over an overview of how we got to where we are right now and what is the history of geospatial technologies and geographic visualization. So, we understand that information is essential for mankind. We need to understand how things work, where things are in order to start producing or analyzing results that can make, for example, the world a better place. And for thousands of centuries, geographic information was just about depicting accurate locations of geographic locations. The physical information, the physical geography was the most important thing. But that has changed for the past 30 years and is not anymore about the physical location, but the so what and why. So not what is what, but also so what and why are those things there. So it's more an approach that looks at geospatial relationships and phenomena and tries to understand that instead of just depicting geographically what is there. So the traditional approach with the traditional maps was leaning towards more that depiction of just geographic location. The modern geospatial approach starts looking more into what are the spatial relationships between different phenomena. What can we do with that information that will help with decision making? And so GIS, how many of you are familiar with GIS and what it means? So GIS basically allows that combination, the where is what, with attribute information about those locations. In a way, GIS is as different as it's similar to traditional mapping. So traditional mapping cares about the geographic locations of features, and GIS does too. But in what is different is because it wants to help decision making with those geographic locations. So when we had a traditional paper map, and this is some of the examples that I will be showing today. This is just Redwood City. Let's say we have a few crimes there. We have a police station. We try to figure out how to get there. With digital maps now, with Crime Report, we can get all the different types of crime, but not only the locations, but also, at what time and what kind of crime it was, what happened with the perpetrator and things like that. So a lot of more information that will happen. What happens with GIS is like all the data needs to be spatially referenced. So we take the real world and we slice it in a series of layers that are separated by theme. And then because all those layers share the same location, we can start looking at combining those layers, looking at spatial patterns and spatial relationships. But because GIS also has attribute information about those locations, we can start doing much more than that. So here, for example, we have some wells that, let's say, for example, one of them just got shut down because it had some poison level of just needs to be shut down. Because it shares the same location with industries and families, we can know immediately which industries or families might be affected by it. But because we have attribute information about those locations, we can then send an email or a letter to say you are going to be without water for the next few days. So how is the evolution of GIS? GIS has just been around for the past 30 years or so. And in the 70s, just started with automatic computer mapping allowed us to start storing information and making some sort of analysis. In the 80s, it moved more to the database model, where we will have computer mapping and then the traditional database. Those combined together started to allow for powerful analysis. In the 90s, we really moved into spatial analysis and modeling. So how can we start combining those powerful databases and start doing very, very powerful analysis, statistical analysis and spatial analysis start to really flourish in the 90s. And then in the 2000s, it has been kind of more of a revolution in a way. So up until here, GIS has been more responding to the needs, has been more evolutionary than revolutionary. In the 2000s, thanks to converging technologies like GPS and remote sensing, CAD data, surveyors, you start seeing all these convergence that allows for much more. We have also the internet, the cell phones, the iPads. All of that allows us to store a lot of information. And then we have this new concept of ubiquitous data. So in 2004, Google Local started just with some businesses listings. In 2005, Google Maps started to have, for the first time, and it's not that long ago if you think about it, 2005, we start looking at, we know where to go. We can see, different streets. We can navigate much easier. We can start putting in cell phones. So all of that data starts being available to us, and then you can see, Microsoft Bing Maps, then we have Nokia coming, Amazon. They are all trying to get into this technology because it is really, really powerful. What we have too is federal agencies, local governments starting putting a lot of data there. And now the trend is big data, right? So I'm going to show you some live websites that will, download Twitter feeds or Facebook data or LinkedIn data, big data sets that can be real time to give us even more information about it. This is more, an understanding of the evolution of the community. So in the 70s, we had just a few hundred experts, but this y-axis shows the level of knowledge that they have, so with a very, very deep level. Then in the 80s, we started spreading a little bit more, still very, very few numbers, a few thousand in the 80s that start having more knowledge, but not as deep as in the 70s. And this keeps going until the 2000s. We have, over 1 billion downloads on Google Earth alone that we just hit just a couple months ago. So we have billions of people that are able to access and understand geospatial data. So what does that mean for us? So it means that we are looking into new territories, which in the sciences have been kind of, being applied for the past 20 years, 15 years very heavily, but I feel, and this is my personal conception, in the humanities and the social sciences is really exploding. So you are looking at, the current trends is to try to get time, not just the space, location, and attributes, but time and change over time. You're looking not only at the outdoors, but mapping indoors. Google right now has over 10,000 buildings, airports. They're doing a project with museums, and we're starting to navigate on the inside. We also start looking at the oceans and not just the earth. And also one very important one is we are starting to look more at a social solution instead of a scientific solution. So the scientific solution is I have different layers and I'm going to run my spatial statistics to know if there's any correlation between this data set or that data set. The social solution is looking more at factors like judgment or belief or trust. Things that are not qualitative, but it gives you a whole other overview that is a little bit different from the scientific solution. So those are current trends, and I'll show you a couple examples right now. So GIS has been, responding to contemporary needs as much as it's been responding to technical breakthroughs. We have been moving from descriptive inventory, so we are just describing what is there, to prescriptive analysis. So we take what is there, we start looking at spatial phenomena, spatial analysis, and when we prescribe what it should be best to do in decision making. This is something really good and very dangerous too. We're moving toward commoditization. That means there's a lot of products out there, a lot of data out there. It means that there's an undifferentiated product, and sometimes can be, characterized by price and not by quality. So I don't know if you remember when Apple came with the maps and showed this city in Australia in the wrong place, and people got lost in the desert, and then the police had to come. That's just a few months ago. So there's an opportunity there, but there's also danger of, who is producing the data and what is the quality of that data. So looking forward, where are we now? Every time we look for directions, our navigation systems, using Google Earth to see the roof of your car, or looking at that new restaurant around the corner, we're always using GIS applications. This one here, I think, is very interesting because it shows that combination of real-time data with social data. So this one is showing moods and happiness, levels of happiness in England. So what they do is you have an application on your phone, and then you can see how happy or sad, and you record that data, and then it shows it in a website. So a lot of different applications that I wish I had 5 hours to show you all, but we're going to go through this. So do you remember from the first class, this is Napoleon's march to Moscow, right? And it's supposed to be, and it's right to be the best graphic. So one thing that Eric and Sefer were mentioning in the first lecture is that there has not been a lot of innovation. And that is true. We are using, that's 1869, this is 2012. So we are also reusing the old methods of how to, represent geographic data in a way, and trying to see different patterns. The fact that, this could be, use a map movies, you can see very different patterns for spatial patterns. And so there are new ways that are using old ways of redefining geography. It's being used in medicine, nanotechnology, astrogeology, and also for dance. So, if you're looking at a play or the different opera or different types of art, you can see different patterns of the different dancers, which give you an idea or a skeleton of that play that then you can compare with other plays. So I think the sky is the limit when you're looking at geospatial or spatial visualizations, right? Everybody thinks you're going to hear everybody's like, this is the best one, tool that you're going to be using, and we all believe that the one we use the most is true, but this one is true. It's the best. This is showing how GIS is being used for natural disasters. So very, very important, and I know it's a little bit of topic, but I want you to know like how important it is for disaster emergencies. So this is showing different snapshots of geographic information used for Hurricane Katrina. This is from my desktop during the Haiti earthquake. So basically, all the efforts were concentrated in Port-au-Prince. Time was running out, and so what they did, the World Bank did, they divided in a series of grid cells, and they asked volunteers all around the world to start looking at a particular area, and Google put the aerial photo the day before and the day after the earthquake to see if that building roof had been destroyed or not. So I was in Santa Barbara at the time, there will be people all around the world. Each one of us grab one of those grid cells, and we start swiping back and forward those cells. So instead of imagine the resources that they will need to cover this entire area, but they will know that exactly they have 2 houses right there when it has been destroyed. So very, very powerful. It was in a matter of minutes. This was me kind of digitizing by hand that roof and say that roof is a 4, which seems severely damaged, sending that online back to the World Bank, and then they send the emergency people. This one is with the volcano, also very important, millions of dollars. It was not a loss of life, but very important too. So these ones are example of integrating time. And so the first one on the left is by NREL, and I think it's a beautiful visualization, because not only you can start playing over time, but also you can see how the different resources and the capacity that it is on a forecast until 2050. So Claire here is changing the different types of energy resources to see, how will that picture will look like in 2050. Okay. This one here on the right, I'm not going to talk about it, but it's one of my favorites, and I had to put it in this lecture. It is from the Spatial History Lab. It shows the slave market in Rio de Janeiro, and the first time I heard Sefer talking about it, I thought it was like the greatest thing ever. So if you don't mind, just for a minute or two to talk about it.
Okay, sure. So what's going on here is I found a fragment of a book that listed all of the taxes paid on buying stuff slaves in a short span of time, about 4 months, where most of the data comes from, in 1869. And then, so my idea was, when I'm looking at that, I thought there are addresses of the buyers and sellers, and I thought, well, there's very little information about how slaves via experience their lives in this particular juncture when being bought and sold. So first of all, I'm kind of interested in just the frequency of buying and selling. I have a histogram there at the bottom. I was interested in gender, whether there was distribution of men and women being bought and sold at different points in time. And I was especially interested in the individual trajectories that kind of pathways from one place to another. Because here you are, you're a slave, you don't really have control over your movements necessarily, where you're living, what your real you looks like. And so this tool allows you to kind of dig down, and instead of just seeing points on a map or just having a table that says X number of slaves are bought and sold, you can see individuals, their names, the names of the owners, and some contextual information about each individual case. That's a kind of attempt to talk about the experience and movement and the context.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so these are great examples of how, the current trends of integrating time into, the geographic locations and the attributes, and how integrated time allows you for extra information or analysis or, hypothesis that you can start exploring, and it will not be possible unless you have that time piece into your visualization. This one here, I think is very interesting because it just gives us an overview of like the how globalization, how data starts being produced on a real-time basis and is more freely available from governments. So this one here is looking at all the different connections between EU countries and where do they export and export from. And I think it is very interesting that this data, which it was impossible to acquire like 2 or 3 years ago, is just there and it's just dynamic. You can click and change and say, I don't want to see biomass, but I want to go instead of the United Kingdom, I want to see how those exports and how that changes, for example, with Germany or some other country, right? And how that massive amount of data, all we need is a browser to start looking at patterns or start looking at the difference between the different countries, right? Any questions so far? All right. And crowdsourcing, I think crowdsourcing is really, really starting to push, not only creates great things like a lot of people like OpenStreetMaps creating data from countries that are not available, but it also allows you to combine it with your own data, with some other people's data, and start pushing also the private sector to start putting more data out there. So the fact that that data is available is kind of like creating that movement and saying, if I want to, stay in the market, I need to put my data out there. So this one is showing, this animation is very simple, but it's very compelling too. Sometimes with geographic data and visualizations, you just want to, create a visualization that is simple. It doesn't have a lot of labels or data on it, but it's really clear. You should have seen this map when we had Sandy, Theo, and other people saw it like right those days, like how that wind changes, and it's dynamic. It's real data, and it's behind the scene. All you need is a browser to get to it. Another example, and talking about those days when we have Hurricane Sandy, we have different types of crowdsources that just happen overnight. This one with Google was very interesting because it will show you like emergency routes, evacuation zones, where were gas stations, where were like different data sets that will be very important for you to know right at that moment. The one that we have here, these were high school students that put it together, say, we need to know where the gas stations still have petrol and which ones are out of order, because people were running out of, they were getting desperate, and high school students put this overnight. So crowdsourcing is getting very powerful. It's driving a lot of people from very different ages to start putting that data that could be extremely useful sometimes. But there's always an issue with maps, and maps are a representation of reality, which means they do not, there's always errors when you are extracting reality, right? And I want to show you just one, I reduced it to just one slide of one of the typical common errors, and I could not have a lecture on geographic data without talking about projections. So I know you don't want me to talk about it, but just bear with me 1 second. So this is the Mercator projection, which is the one that has been used the most to represent global data sets, right? But there's a problem with it. And because it keeps the shapes of the different countries really nicely is one reason I want to believe that that's why it has been used. However, it used to be called the racist projection because the southern hemisphere is much smaller in size compared to the northern hemisphere. So if we use an equal area projection, this is actually the size of the United States compared to the Amazon. If we use a projection that keeps those areas proportionate, so Peters in the 70s came out with this projection, and I'm from Spain, I'm not used to see Europe that tiny compared to Africa, right? But that's the real proportion in size. The problem with this projection is it doesn't keep shapes. So the countries are very distorted, but the sizes are proportionate. A whole different view of the world from one to another. So there's always a risk that comes up with using maps because geospatial technology and geographic data is available. There's also a risk of not having the underlying concepts that will lead you to different conclusions. And I think Eric in next week, he's going to tell you a lot about symbolization and how much you can lie or distort reality depending on your symbols. One interesting new way of representations are cartograms. So cartograms define concepts like area or distance. Instead of using the real value of area or distance, they use another variable. So here, for example, this map is showing the world by number of soccer clubs. Okay, and if we didn't if we didn't win the World Cup, I wouldn't be showing this, but I have to brag a little bit about it. Another type will be here looking at world consumption. So the countries that consume much more will be much more bigger and out of proportion than the ones that use less. This is a very interesting, different way, different geography, looking at the United States based on different ethnicities. So it doesn't mean that this data is really distorted. It means that if you find new ways of defining geography, and that geography is defined by these variables, that's kind of the size or the shapes that the United States will take, right? So these are all very interesting approaches, and this one here combines those cartograms with mood. So we look at Twitter. This application looks at Twitter and is looking at, how the country feels, happy or sad, depending on, Twitter feeds and words that it finds it. And the very interesting part about it is that, it changes. You can see in the time lapse there, it changes over time. Like in the morning, people seem to be happier. And at night, they seem to be happier too. And you can see when she starts playing the animation how it changes with time from morning to night in the mood from the East Coast to the West Coast. Okay, so this animation to me is one of my favorites because it has a new way of geography. It's also dealing with massive amount of data. It's talking about mood and it's bringing time. So you have all of those new trends in just one place. Right. That's true. I've seen some maps that says, yeah. All right. So Eric also asked me to mention a little bit about spatial statistics. And next week, you're going to be digging very deep into GIS and GIS techniques and symbology. But I want to, tell you a little bit about spatial statistics and why it's something that is really worth pursuing. So spatial statistics allow you to incorporate space and other terms like area or distances into traditional statistics. So what spatial statistics allow you to do is to extend what the eye can or the mind cannot really see it, and allow you to start assessing spatial patterns or spatial relationships. It takes the ambiguity out of the question, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples that shows that. How many of you have taken statistics, basic statistics? All right. Okay, so why we use spatial statistics? So this is unfortunately one of the data sets that we're going to be using in the lab later on, and is about mass shootings in the United States. So after Sandy Hook, I just started putting together a database and graphics to talk about, let's put it in a map, all of the shootings since 1966 or something like that. I want to see not just a list and then forget about it. I wanted to put it all in one database and start visualizing what is really happening. And so this one has the difference between the maps is just the symbology, right? But the color that you use, the size that you use, it just gives a different story of what is happening, right? If I use red and it's very big, and if I use, more like a subtle color and I use a smaller size, so there's a lot of ambiguity in the colors that you choose. What is the division that you do in your data, or the symbol style and size to give a different picture, a different map? Spatial statistics take that out of the question. And so here, for example, we're looking at GAN territories in downtown LA. So the way we know, that the GANs were there is because they put different graffitis. So each point shows a different graffiti for a different GAN, right? But if I have only the points, it's hard for me to tell what really is happening there. But if we use something as simple as the standard deviation ellipse that is looking at the core 99% or 95%, for example, we start looking at the dispersion and distribution of each GAN, and then we can start looking at the areas of overlap and say that could be a very conflictive area. So it gives you, from going just from points to start, extracted information that is there, but the human eye cannot really see with just seeing the points in different colors, then we can start saying, okay, maybe we need to deploy more police there or pay more attention to that area. Another use of spatial statistics is looking at foreclosures, for example, hotspots. So hotspots look at statistically significant high clustering of high values. It's based on like p-values in Z-score. It's not based on, I'm going to put some red and I'm going to put some blue and like call it a day, right? And that information, it becomes really extremely important for many different analyses. So here, for example, once you look at hotspots, you can start looking at, the causes for it. So first, I want to know why are such high concentrations of certain spatial phenomena. Once I find that, I can start looking at why is that happening. So let's say, for example, a good example is sudden infant syndrome death. So sudden infant syndrome death used to be believed that it was bad luck. There were some babies that will die just because of bad luck. But thanks to like a hospital analysis, we could start seeing that there were high concentrations in certain areas. What you do after that is that you start looking at why. What are the environmental factors or socioeconomic factors that push that? So then it was demonstrated that sudden infant syndrome death was not bad luck. There were actually some factors that were pushing those deaths. So that's how critical to me, at least, or important it can be to start looking at spatial statistics. And so once you find those clusters, you start looking at regression analysis and you start understanding why. So with spatial statistics, you can recognize patterns and relationships, identify where are the outliers or the anomalies, because that might give you also a lot of information, not just the clustering. You can start visualizing relationships, proximity, connectivity, and then you can do extrapolation or interpolation when you, for example, don't have enough data. But it's very important, and all of the spatial statistics are always based on the first law of geography that says things that are closer together tend to be more similar than things that are farther apart. And so based on that concept, we start looking at things. So if I'm closer to her, are we more similar than her and I that are farther apart? So based on that relationship in values with relationship in distance that is called spatial autocorrelation, we start building those analyses with spatial statistics. It is very important if you ever go into spatial statistics to start exploring your data. The more you explore your data, so histograms, looking at the dispersion of your data, the distribution of your data, the more you can explain and understand your analysis at the end. So here, these are just examples of different exploratory tools. But going back into the crime in Redwood City that I was collecting, these are all my points. I can start looking at the histogram and looking at concentrations of crime, trends analysis, north to south or east to west, and I can look at Voronoi map that would allow me for a distribution of data. Sometimes the tools that you can use can be really, really simple. For example, the mean center. So the mean center, you have a lot of points and you calculate the mean center. It's just the mean of the x and y's of data. Well, you remember that Eric mentioned the snow map, right? The London cholera. It was used to believe that cholera was transmitted by this miasma, this thing in the air that will transmit that disease. Well, if you actually, so that well that was proved that it was the cause of the cholera actually is the center of the distribution of all the deaths. And so it's like right dead on is right there. That's the center. So there's a lot of tools that can be simple or easy that you can use. So here we start looking at different ways that we can analyze the data. So here, for example, if I start looking at the crime, I can start looking at the center of different types of crimes and start building more information that is there, but the human eye cannot really tell what's happening with all those points, even if I make them different colors. But I start using different tools, I can start understanding more. This is the standard deviation ellipse that I mentioned before. So here, for example, if we are looking at distribution of disease of cholera in Africa, we can see the first year, the distribution is kind of more that way. The second year, it starts going up north, and then the third year is basically, epidemiologists use a lot this kind of information to decide when there's an outbreak or not. This is kind of like a standard deviation ellipse for the different crimes in Redwood City. Here, this is a very good example in downtown LA. So spatial statistics allows you for much more information than traditional statistics. This is a good example. Segregation index is usually a number. So in LA, for example, if I have a segregation index of 2.6, I can shuffle these different ethnicities all around and I can still get the same number, but the picture is very different. So looking at the standard deviation ellipse, I can give much more information about the areas of overlap. Where are they overlapping or why? And so you get much more information about segregation that way. This one is looking at Paris attacks. And this is what I want you from now on, whenever you have points data, incidents, to never ever just like plot them there and just let them be, right? So from now on, you're always going to start trying to decipher more information from it. So what happens if we take the standard deviation ellipse for those attacks every 6 months? We can start seeing here, and you will see in a second, that those attacks are actually starting to concentrate. So imagine what that means, for example, for insurance companies or for military or for companies that really need to, go through that area. Instead of like trying to cover this entire area, you can really start concentrating there more. So instead of presenting those points, you can start looking at the distribution with the standard deviation ellipse for every 6 months. Okay? Any questions so far? Okay, a little bit more spatial statistics and then I'm almost done. This one here is looking at income levels. So let's say, for example, we have a county and we have different income levels and we use different colors, right? So here we'll have people with lower income levels will be in yellow and people with higher income levels will be in blue. So will you say that over time, do they tend to mix more together or they tend to segregate more by looking at these three? Segregate more? Why? Yeah. So the thing is also, it's hard to tell sometimes. Imagine, so what they did for this exercise, they had it 30 times, 30 years, this map. It's really hard sometimes to tell, especially if you start changing the classes and the colors, if there's more segregation or less segregation. So you use tools like the spatial autocorrelation, and you will see that actually this number is decreasing, which means that they tend to segregate more over time. This is an example of a hotspot analysis, and this is how it looks data, just looking at crime data and applying a hotspot analysis. The highest concentration in crime, where are they happening, right? So very different ways of showing. Once we get the hotspot analysis, we can look at, okay, how much of that crime is explained just by population itself? So why do we have such high crime here? It's because we have a high density of population there. So then you can start looking at ways of analyzing that data. This is from a student switching a little bit to sciences down at Hawkins Marine Station. She was tracing, they were tracing sharks in the Pacific, and so they put a GPS tag on each shark. And so you have here 3 maps for 3 different sharks, and each color is a different year. So you can kind of get an idea of what's happening there. But what if you have 80 sharks and you're tagging them all? How do you deal with that data? You start looking at density analysis, which you will be doing next week, I believe. You start looking at the standard deviation ellipse that looks at the distribution and the dispersion, and you see that there's 1 year that they all shift up north. And then you can start looking at factors that push the sharks to go north. Maybe there was like different in climate, maybe there was some shipping lanes routes that changed, maybe there was lack of predators, whatever it will be. Now that we know that shift and we start looking at that, we can start looking at factors that will push it. So the human eye cannot understand this, even if I put different colors all together, but it can understand this. Spatial statistics allow you to see that. And so what we're going to be doing today are 2 exercises. One is with campaign data. So there's a data fest happening in this room on Saturday and Sunday, and I put together a website with the tutorial and with all the data. Is looking at campaign donations and how they morph the elections, right? So if we look at the elections, this is the traditional view, right? Different colors for different maps. But there are different ways that we can show this. So if you look here, the New York Times is looking at a shift on the election. So this is for 2000, if we go to 2008, a lot of the country went Democrat. But if you change it to 2012, a lot of the country went Republican, still the Democrats won. So a different way of looking at those results. Then a professor here at Stanford, Jonathan Rodden, created the Stanford Election Atlas that is looking at the vote results by precinct level. And it's very interesting. It's really outstanding, like the stories that you can start telling. So if we go down here to Pittsburgh, for example, you will see that the center of all those cities tends to be Democratic, and then there's this radiation of red, of Republicans radiating from those cities. So if we zoom out a little bit, Eric. Okay. Well, if you zoom out a little bit more, you can start seeing, for example, those radios of Republican votes that sometimes they are. They follow like an old railroad line that is not even active anymore, or a river. So a lot of really interesting stories. And if we go here, for example, to Breezy Point in New York, where Sandy was affected by it, you can see in Fifth Avenue and other places like how the boats change from one side of the street to the other. And what's very interesting here is like if you click on any of this, you can get information about it. So I haven't talked much about, making your graphics or visualizations interactive, but that's kind of like the trend or the way that a simple PDF or JPEG doesn't work anymore. And so here you can start see how they voted, but you can change your variables here. And instead of saying, well, I want to see the different races that I have there, for example. And so instead of looking at the votes, you can look here, where are the Irish Americans and other people and how do they tend to vote. So a very different way of looking at it. So just to give you an idea, what we got is like we got all of the campaign donations. We geocode all of those. Every individual donation, we geocode those. But it's very hard to make sense of it. So techniques that we tried is like, okay, we divided by party. We do some like density analysis, and we'll do some hotspot analysis. What we are doing today and what we're going to be focusing is in using simple programs. So they are so simple that all you need is a browser, really. You don't even need to install anything. We aggregated this data per state, and then we look at different demographic census data and say, compared to average age or family size or educational attainment, how do they relate to each other? So this is the website. And you can see like what we will be doing today. We will be doing like interactive maps we will be doing interactive graphics and all coming out of a different, of the same table. Basically, we'll be working with a table. And so this is not, the graphics are not as customizable as Tableau. The network graphics are not as good as Gephi. You cannot do spatial analysis like you do in ArcGIS that you will be using next week, but you can do all of it. You can do it interactive and collaborative. You don't need any programming skills, and then you can insert all of these graphics like we have here interactively in your website in just a matter of minutes. The other one that we'll be looking will be mass shootings. So these are different visualizations that we have for it. The idea is like, how can I make something that is not about the shooter or their faces, or is not, that takes away things like massacre or shootings. And so what we developed is a website that is this one here that is for people to use, that took away, you know, all of the maps and charts, took away the name of the shooter, but a lot of interesting information. So, you know, a timeline, the number of victims over time. So people who are saying there's not more shootings over time, how can we look at it? And Claire has the website right there. Different graphics, looking at the fate of the killer, when he killed himself, where are the places where they tend to go. So all of those, I basically created that over like 12, 14 hours and what it took the most was actually to get the data, but to create that website and these graphics, you can do it in less than an hour. And so what we will do in the first part of the lab, we'll go through the campaign donations and looking at the tools, and then in the second part of the lab, you are going to explore on your own. I'm not going to tell you how to use the data, what kind of filters of queries you want to use, but how would you use this data to start a national debate? And it doesn't need to be about guns. It can be about mental health or other social programs or things like that. Any questions? So next week, I just want to give you a pick of, it's about interpreting your results. And thank you very much.